the Sustainable Planning and Design Group. So we've been working on the Irondequoit Active Transportation Plan for just about a year now, because we started last fall, and we're moving into some of the final phases of the project. The other half of our design team is Sprinkle Consulting out of Tampa, Florida. They're not with us tonight. They've been very active in the project, and right now they're kind of doing the wizard behind the curtain thing and working remotely with us to analyze some of the data and come up with a preliminary recommendations. There's been a lot of collaboration and a lot of people working on this project. This is the advisory committee that we started with, and most of them are still with us. There's been a couple of changes along the way. But the stakeholder groups have been very robust and very interactive throughout the whole process. Of course, starting with the GTC, who provided funding for the project, various folks at the town of Irondequoit, the Irondequoit Police Department, RTS has been channeling us information on the transit systems, and a number of different neighborhood groups, the Rochester Cycling Alliance. So we've had a lot of information, a lot of suggestions coming from all the players, and everybody's been very active in the process right from the beginning, and that carries on into the stages we're in now. So we are pretty much in the final third of this project, and if we boil down the process, there were three big questions that we were trying to answer relative to active transportation in Irondequoit, and it was, what do we have? And followed by, what do we want? And now we're looking at, how do we get there? So the what do we have question was a very detailed inventory of existing conditions, and that was the topic of the last public meeting we had back in March, I believe. So a lot of Irondequoit residents came out for that and offered their own comments and suggestions. The existing conditions was a combination of desktop analysis and in-the-field verification. The what do we want question is piled into a bucket called our needs assessment. So we looked at what we were hearing from people about what were the priorities and trying to address safety, sustainability, and connectivity, both to destinations within the town, but intermunicipal connections to nearby communities as well. And then where we are now is, how do we get there? So we've established what we want to achieve, and the preliminary recommendations that you're going to look at tonight are our first responses to all the public input that we've had so far through various methods. And what you'll see on the diagram is that public input has been a big part of all three slices of this pie, and we hope to get more tonight and in the days following this meeting. So we gathered public input largely through the community and the committee members and their personal networks. We also did an online survey, which is still up and available on the town website. If you haven't filled it out, we would encourage you to do so. We've had over 250 responses to that survey, which is really helping us narrow the beam and look at some priorities for the recommendations. We also had a GIS crowdsource interactive mapping tool that you could take your device out into the town and use a pull-down menu to identify problems and barriers for biking and walking, and that's also given us a different layer of information. So we combine different layers and different methods and come up with a picture of what needs to be done. So the existing conditions assessment is available on the tables here in case you weren't at the last meeting or wanted to see some of the data that's being compiled to guide our recommendations. And it includes all kinds of things. We did bicycle level of service and pedestrian level of service on the study network, which was about 43 miles of roadway in Irondequoit. And that looks at all kinds of things in those environments that make it attractive or unattractive for biking and walking. Presence or absence of sidewalks, buffer between curb and sidewalk, the width of the lanes, the traffic counts, the speeds, the percentage of heavy vehicles, and then algorithms help us determine which roads need the most help. So with all of that, we move towards responding with some preliminary recommendations, and Nicole's going to give you an overview of those. And after that, we have everything up on boards and posters in the back, and we'll be free to answer your questions. So go ahead.
Thanks.
You just push those little buttons, and that's it.
The older one teaching the younger one technology. That's new.
Crazy, huh?
So I'm going to give a really brief overview, and then like Tom mentioned, there's going to be boards in the back. So if anyone has detailed questions or wants to see the level of detail we went into for all these recommendations, please peruse around and check everything out and ask us questions. This is just a base map to show you the general project area. You can see the roads that are orange. You can kind of see on this screen here. Those are Monroe County DOT jurisdiction, so any recommendations that we're making on those roads are going to have to go through Monroe County DOT. There's going to have to be coordination with the town on that. So all of these recommendations are conceptual right now, and they will need further investigation following this in the preliminary design phase. So Tom briefly touched on the level of service graphics. As he mentioned, this indicates how safe or how comfortable people feel when they're out in these areas. This is pedestrian here, so it's more how people feel when they're on the sidewalk or on the roadway if they have to walk on the road. From this, we were able to identify some sidewalk gaps that were missing or some areas that could use improvements for the pedestrian realm. We also looked at the bicycle level of service, which is a similar study, as Tom mentioned, with the equations that we use. And again, it just helps with how people feel out there and where we see the most important areas for improvements and what roadways we can possibly stripe or add signage to. So we take the level of service data and then we run some more calculations and we come up with some on-street bicycle facility recommendations. And these are just for bicycle facilities. This is a really data-driven figure. So some of the areas you may see a discrepancy as to if you are down a corridor, maybe you feel that it needs an improvement. It may not show up here just because this is purely on data, not on field work. So through this figure, we identify 5 different categories. There's no recommended improvements, which is the darker blue. There's a roadway restripe candidate, which is taking the existing roadway, restriping it, possibly narrowing the lanes to add a shoulder. The yellow category is for a road diet, which you'll see over here. Part of that already went under, already had a road diet, so we are going to have to update that data. We just have not done it yet, but we will be doing that when we prepare the final draft report. The yellow lines are the add or widen paved shoulders. So those are roadways that are too narrow, but they may not be able to be restriped. These are kind of done on a case-by-case basis if they move forward. These may be in residential areas where there isn't enough right-of-way to add a shoulder. So again, it's just case-by-case basis. They'll have to be looked into further. And then the red line are the detailed corridor study networks. And again, those are roads that just need a little bit more investigation, further study. Next up, we have the trails and micro trails. So we look at the existing trails within Irondequoit, the planned or proposed trails, and then some areas where trails may be needed or may be requested. This figure goes primarily off public input. Our focus here was identifying micro trails, and these are trails that may not be through a park or through a town-owned property right now, but they are kind of underdeveloped trails or goat paths, if you call them, so they may not have pavement, or they have pavement, but they may not be maintained year-round right now, so they could be not getting plowed or not providing year-round access for people. And that's in this red circle here are the micro trails. And then part of this trail study was looking at the Irondequoit Seneca Trail. There was a feasibility study done in 2013 that looked at the feasibility of getting a trail from the north end of the existing El Camino Trail, heading north to almost to the lake. So this study is in place. There are currently some land ownership issues moving forward, and because it's just a study, there's nothing happening right now in this plan, but there could be in the future. And this would provide a really nice connection, like I said, from the city of Rochester at the El Camino Trail all the way up to the lake, which could be really great. And there's also connections shown into the neighborhoods, so people could access the trail. Next up, we looked at bicycle boulevards. So going away from kind of the on-road bike facilities that are data-driven and actually getting out in the field and seeing what roads would be suitable for bike boulevards. And bike boulevards are low volume, low speed roads, and we try to get connections from major destinations like parks or town hall, those facilities, that people don't have to be on the main roadways. So you can avoid Hudson in this area if you take this route. So we looked at those. We came up with 5 alternatives that are shown in the back there. You can again see just what we were thinking. To make a bike boulevard, it's usually pavement graphics and signage, and they try to take routes that are not, they don't attract vehicles as a cut through. So it's not going to be just one straight road that people can drive through and cut down and beat a light or something like that. But they take kind of a nice scenic route for the bicyclists and keep the cars at a slower speed. We also looked at prototype intersections. Through public input and through dealing with the advisory committee, we got the list down to 6 intersections. I think we started with 10, maybe?
10 or 12.
So we broke it down to 6, and these intersections are meant to be prototype examples. They're kind of case studies for the whole town of Arundequite, where we looked at improvements such as crosswalk enhancements, pedestrian signals, changing the turning radii to slow the vehicles down, but still make sure that that's going to accept the trucks that may be using that route. So we have 6 of these. They're in that corner back there. Please take a look at them, share any comments you have. We also started looking at the existing transit system, and again, this was kind of driven from the public input. RTS sent us some data at the beginning of the project that talks about the ridership based on stops and the routes that are out there right now. So what we did was take the stops with the highest ridership, and we looked at how we can improve those stops. So we came up with 4 main stops for that. And again, we work with RTS, and any improvements would have to be coordinated with RTS and the town of Arundequite. But we looked at these stops to see if they had shelter, so to protect people from the weather elements and the wind. We looked to see if they had access from where people are getting off or on the bus to the shelter to make sure it was accessible fully. And then we also look at seating, bike racks, if there's lighting out there to keep safety. And we look at the connection, not only from the bus to the shelter, but from the shelter to the final destination. So if they're heading into a shopping plaza, how are people getting safely from the shelter to that plaza? If they have to cross a parking lot, we looked at striping options just to get people over there safely. And for the transit stops, we also did a prototype transit. This is a location over on Goodman, and it's just showing kind of the ideal transit stop that we would all really like to see. It's showing a shelter that's protecting people from the rain, from the wind, the snow, with seating, bike racks, lighting, some enhanced signage. It shows a little bit of pavement differential so people know that they've arrived at the bus stop. Some pervious materials also just to help control the water. There's also a connection here that would get people safely into this plaza. So again, this is just a prototype bus stop. This is kind of what we would hope would be the goal for any transit stops improvements. But again, partnerships would probably need to happen with RTS, Town of Arundequite, and possibly private landowners if that's going on to private land. So, as I mentioned, partnerships may need to happen, so that brings up the topic of funding and how do these improvements get funded. At that point, I'm going to turn it back over to Tom.
Sure. So you can see from Nicole's overview that there's a package of recommendations that covers a wide spectrum. Some of them are very affordable. They're pretty much low-hanging fruit. They don't require a lot of heavy-duty infrastructure changes. And it goes all the way to more long-term aspirational projects. So for example, the construction of the Arundequite Seneca Trail would be a big ticket item with a big impact on a very large community. Things like the bicycle boulevards are really very affordable and within easy grabbing for the town, should they want to go forward with that. Certainly the town of Brighton is a good example, and they came up with a system for very low-cost, low-impact bicycle boulevards in the town, which are quite effective for getting people around. So we try to really cover a broad spectrum of different levels of improvements that could happen near-term, mid-term, and long-term. But the physical infrastructure by itself is not enough to achieve the level of change which the town wants to see. So we have to also look at programs and policies, outreach and education, and certainly funding opportunities. So some of the things that are ongoing now and are our next steps for the project, we are reviewing the town's zoning code relative to bike and pedestrian travel. We look at any existing engineering standards or details that are available. We compare those from what we know about current best practices and what's being done around the country and make recommendations for changes in those areas. Outreach and education is really kind of critical ongoing to create a bike-friendly and pedestrian-friendly culture in Irondequoit. And we have identified a number of different community groups and partners who are already doing things that we can tap into and kind of piggyback on and really educate people and create programs and events that'll support, encourage active transportation. And then finally, identification of potential funding sources for all of this is obviously a key element. So we look at everything from federal transportation funding to private foundations for the different recommendations that we're looking at. So we do a lot of grant writing and a lot of fundraising, and as part of that, we get to know these programs very, very well. So as we come up with ideas for recommendations and improvements in Irondequoit, we're going to match those with what we feel are the best potential funding sources and make that part of the report, which will help with implementation of this moving forward. And that's the end of our talking. A lot of more detailed material is in the display area in the back, and we're happy to look at that and answer any questions people may have.
And I want to thank you guys. So before we end this video, because we're going to post this on the website for the town, I just want to let the community know that as the draft is being developed, at some point we're going to have a draft report that will be shared on the website, and there'll be another opportunity for additional feedback. Right now, various agencies that might be connected to the recommendations that are included in the plan are providing comment. Members of the advisory committee, the public is still providing feedback through the website and through via email. So that is going to continue to be encouraged until the report is finalized. So thanks so much, both of you, for a great presentation and summary. We appreciate it.
Anybody got any questions?
Yeah.